My name is Luis Montoya. I'm DART's Chief Planning Officer. I oversee the route planning and scheduling, as well as our strategic planning here at DART. Today, I'm going to go over briefly what the project is. I'm going to talk about some near-term recommendations, some long-term recommendations, and as I mentioned, have plenty of time for comments and questions. So first up, we're here today to talk about our long-range service plan. The goals of the study are to optimize existing service. We want to do the most with the resources we already have. That means that we look at the performance of all our routes, we look at ridership, and we make sure that we're using our resources efficiently and effectively. Secondly, we want to look at the evolving needs of the region and think about how our service might need to evolve to be responsive to those needs. Third, we want to make sure that we're looking at innovative service delivery models, things above and beyond the bus service that we are primarily known for. And we want to develop a long-term plan for DART services. This slide just shows an overview of the timeline for the study. We actually started this study in early 2020. We had to put a pause in it, of course, as the pandemic took hold, and we needed to focus on our response to the pandemic and our recovery. But we did pick the study back up earlier this year, and we conducted a round of public outreach in the spring. During that public outreach, we asked people, how do you use the service today? Are there ways in which you need increased service to meet your needs? And some more detailed questions along those lines. We received over 1,200 responses to that survey, and that feedback is incorporated throughout the plan. Right now, we have some recommendations that I'm going to share with you today, and the goal is to collect feedback on those recommendations so that we can finalize our plan for our Board of Commissioners to approve at the end of the calendar year. So first up, I want to recap some of the things that we found when we did our study. We looked at ridership. We looked at land use. Where are people living? Where are people working? We looked at travel patterns beyond just bus use. We looked at people's driving patterns. And a few things that we saw was that DART's existing bus service is fairly cost effective. We have a range of about 30 bus routes that vary whether they operate 7 days a week, whether they operate 5 days a week, whether they operate all day, whether they operate only during certain times of the day. And for the most part, that service is already tailored to the ridership that we see. And in fact, the majority of our riders, 2/3 of our bus riders, ride on the 9 most frequent bus routes. So that means that we're putting the most resources where the most people are already using them. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not areas of the region that we don't serve well, and we'll get into that. But just in terms of the existing bus route network, we feel that it's pretty well optimized. We also have looked at ridership over time, and we've seen that express routes and shuttle routes, those routes that might be more tailored for commuters, and especially longer distance commuters, the ridership on those has been going down for a while. And that actually even precedes the COVID-19 pandemic, where of course we saw commuting patterns and travel patterns generally go down. But our local routes, those routes that serve more local needs, that operate more frequently, ridership on those routes is more stable. It was more stable before the pandemic, and it's been more stable even through the pandemic. We've seen less ridership impacts on those routes. We know that there's a disconnect between jobs and housing in our region, that where people can afford to live is often not near where the jobs are. And so we wanted to think in this study closely about how we can connect people to work. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're being responsive to the public feedback that we've received. We know that our customers, and even people who don't ride DART, who say they are interested in DART, say that DART needs to go to more places and it needs to be faster to get where you need to go. And so those are two things that we've taken seriously and we've studied as part of this. And so when we think about the mobility needs of our region, the things that we want to try to address are we want to look at any bus routes that are underperforming, where the resources just might not be being used effectively. We want to be responsive to customer needs and think about the hours of service that we provide and providing service to more places and increasing the frequency of service so that we can shorten travel times. Those were all things that our customers said they wanted to see. And then lastly, as we looked at the needs of our region, where people live, where jobs are, and in particular how our region is growing, we wanted to see how we could have more service within communities and between communities and not just to downtown. If you're familiar with DART's existing bus route network, most of the routes come in and out of downtown Des Moines, in and out of DART Central Station. And so we wanted to come up with proposals that allow people to get where they need to go without having to come to downtown. When we think about those mobility needs that we've seen in the region, that we have some tools at our disposal to be able to address those needs. Of course, fixed route buses, that's the big purple buses that operate on a set time and a set schedule, those are going to continue to be the most efficient and effective way to move people in our region. If you can get enough people on a bus, there's no more efficient way to move them. However, those larger buses operating on set times and set schedules really do best on busy corridors where there's more dense housing, where there's lots of destinations for people to go to. And not everywhere in our region fits those characteristics, especially as we move outside of the core of our region and we get out into more of the suburbs, then destinations are more spread out, housing is more spread out, and streets aren't always as walkable. And so, you have longer distances to get to a bus route. And so we want to think about some more flexible service models. And one model that we've had some success with is partnering with Uber and Yellow Cab for an on-demand service. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But another type of service that we want to try out is what's called microtransit. And that's where you use the technology similar to Uber or Lyft, where people can order a trip on their mobile phone and that vehicle can be dispatched on demand. We want to use that on DART vehicles with DART drivers so that we can incorporate the convenience of mobile booking with the accessibility of a DART vehicle. And then lastly, bike share and scooter share is becoming, there's increasing interest and popularity of those different what we call micro mobility solutions. And while DART doesn't run the bike share program and there isn't scooter share here in our region, we do want to think about how we can incorporate those modes of transportation into our transit system so that people have more flexibility and more options to travel. Our vision for the future really looks at the existing land use. So if we start at the bottom and then work our way up, we've looked at where people live, where people work, how dense the housing and jobs are. And we want to make sure in our plan that our priority corridors, those corridors with service 7 days a week, all day, more frequently, that those corridors are centered around the most dense housing and the most dense jobs so that we can be efficient and effective with our resources. We also have additional bus routes that aren't necessarily priority routes that maybe only operate during certain days of the week or certain times of the day that are also important to reach key destinations in areas of our region. We want to look at the connections between bus routes and in particular how, as we incorporate new types of service, that we have bus stops and technology that allow people to seamlessly transfer between types of service. And then lastly, we hope that the service that DART provides can be further built on and reinforced by additional housing and job growth. The most efficient and effective way to serve our region with transit is if new jobs and housing are built around existing transit infrastructure. And so now I'm going to go over our recommendations. I talked about the needs that we identified. I talked about kind of how we plan transit service. And now I'm going to talk about the actual proposals. The proposals are split up into a couple of different buckets. The first that I'm going to go over are our near-term service proposals. And these are the service proposals where we are looking at underperforming routes, routes where we have seen decreased ridership and where we think that we can repurpose the resources to better serve our customers and maybe even attract new customers by providing more flexibility and also even extending fixed route service where it makes the most sense. Now, I'm going to go over 4 near-term proposals. All 4 of them are cost neutral on DART's operating budget. Means that we are taking services we're basically replacing services so that there's not additional cost on the annual DART budget. There are some additional staffing considerations and technology costs that go along with an evolution, but they're not recurring operating costs. And then after I go over these 4 near-term proposals, I'm also going to talk about some longer-term proposals that do have increased cost implications. I'm going to go over these relatively quickly, but we will pause and allow time for questions, and we can certainly have more one-on-one discussions about any and all of these. And once again, all of these recommendations are on our website, ridedart.com/future. So the first near-term recommendation is actually something that we're already in process of implementing. In Ankeny, one of the fastest growing communities in our region, we see an increasing need for transit. And we see an opportunity to try an innovative service delivery model called microtransit, where we can provide the flexibility for customers to book trips when they need them, where they need them, on a DART vehicle. And so our proposal is to take the existing Ankeny on-call shuttle, which is a DART vehicle that takes you anywhere in Ankeny that you have to book a day ahead of time, to take that service and transition it to microtransit, where instead of having to call a day ahead of time, customers can use their mobile phone to book a trip when they need it, where they need it, within the zone. Now, customers who choose to book ahead of time, a day ahead of time or a week ahead of time, can still do that. Customers who want to call DART customer service to book a trip can still do that. But the goal here is to hopefully open up this service to more customers by increasing the flexibility of it by adding the mobile phone option. We are also proposing to expand the hours of this service so that it runs from 6 in the morning to 6:30 in the evening every weekday. And once again, this is on, you can see in the picture, it would be on a DART vehicle, this service. And this is funded already, and it's set to launch in November. So our next proposal is a little bit different. Instead of using DART vehicles, this proposal is to expand our partnership with Uber and Yellow Cab to provide trips to and from key bus stops. The proposal here is in Urbandale and Grimes, where we propose to eliminate Route 74. This is a shuttle route that connects from Valley West Mall up through Urbandale and does a loop up here to various, mostly businesses up there, but then there's also some businesses and residences along 100th Street. The proposal is to replace that DART bus route with a partnership with Uber and Yellow Cab, where people can get a ride from anywhere in this light orange zone to either the Urbandale City Hall bus stop or the Valley West Mall bus stop, where multiple bus routes come in. The idea here is that we're still connecting people to the broader transit network. However, we're adding more flexibility because instead of having to wait for this bus, which only makes a few trips in the morning and a few trips in the evening, we can provide this Uber or Yellow Cab service all day long. And so that if you're trying to go up here in the middle of the day, let's say at noon, then you can get an Uber or a Yellow Cab from Valley West Mall or from the Urbandale City Hall and Library to anywhere in this zone. Now we're also expanding access, expanding it all the way up to Grimes, whereas currently you have to be within walking distance of the bus route in order to access the service. We know that there's increasingly more and more job opportunities up and around 8035, an area known as the Urban Loop, as well as Grimes, which I believe is now the fastest growing community in the metro. Right now, we've tried this service. We tried it starting in 2019 in this area here, this darker shaded area of Urbandale and slice of Des Moines. And before the pandemic, it was going fairly well. We have had some issues during the pandemic with Uber driver availability that we are closely monitoring, and we wouldn't move forward with this proposal until those concerns were dealt with. The next proposal is another microtransit proposal operated on a DART vehicle with a DART driver. And this proposal is in West Des Moines, where we would seek to replace Route 72 with a microtransit service. Route 72 currently does a loop along Mill Civic Parkway, up along University, connecting Jordan Creek Mall, Valley Junction, and Valley West Mall. You can see ridership is in these black circles. The proposal is to eliminate Route 72 and to serve customers along University and along 60th with fixed route by extending Route 3, which is one of the busiest routes in the network, extending it from Valley West Mall all the way along west, along University, down 60th to Jordan Creek Mall. And that way, where there's the most ridership of Route 72, they will still have a fixed route option. However, for the rest of Route 72, we propose replacing it with microtransit. That's a shuttle that could go anywhere within the purple zone, not just to bus stops, but door to door, wherever people need to go, on a DART vehicle. And once again, this would be able to be booked with the mobile phone or call ahead and book. The last near-term proposal that I'll share, and then I'm gonna stop and see if there's any questions, is a fixed route proposal, where we would seek to eliminate an underperforming route, Express Route 99, which goes in between Altoona. It's the green route here on the map, which goes between Altoona and downtown Des Moines. The proposal would be to use those resources to extend more trips along Adventureland Drive all the way into Bondurant. So about a year ago, we extended Route 17 up to the new Amazon Fulfillment Center in Bondurant. But that route, this dashed line that I'm showing, only operates in coordination with the Amazon shift times. So it's just a few trips a day. Our proposal would be to provide that service hourly, so that now there would be hourly service along Adventureland Drive, where we know there's jobs, there's destinations, and increasingly housing being built along Adventureland Drive. Of course, people who currently commute via Route 99, some of them would be affected by this. Some would transition, hopefully, to Route 17. The trip might take a little bit longer to take the local route as opposed to the express route, but people would still be within walking distance of the route up along Adventureland Drive. And then some other folks hopefully could use the park and ride that's available at the Walmart in Altoona. The goal here is to address an underperforming bus route, one that ridership has been going down for years, even before the pandemic, and use those resources to reinvest in transit in the same community and extend it where we think it could serve more people along Adventureland Drive. So those first four that I went over, those were the near-term service proposals. Those are things that we intend to implement over the next couple of years because they're cost neutral, because we think they'd have immediate benefits for our customers. Now, there's also a number of recommendations that we have that we think could benefit our region, that we think are responsive to the feedback that we received, but that would cost more money that has not been identified for DART. So I want to go over those things, but I also want to be aware of people's time, and because there's a lot of them, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. I'll highlight them, and then I'll welcome you all to ask questions, and even we can set up breakout groups to go into things in more detail depending on your interest level.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, I mentioned the goals that we're trying to solve for: access to more places in our region, reducing travel times and reducing wait times, extending the hours of service, and facilitating travel outside of Des Moines. The first set of recommendations are what we're calling modest enhancements, are things that we think can be useful. They could be useful today, but there's not funding identified for them. These were the things that rose up from the public feedback that we received and the analysis that we did. Things like increasing service on Route 8 on the south side of Des Moines, increasing weekend service frequency on routes and new weekend routes, new Flex Connect zones to use that Uber and Yellow Cab model to connect people more in our region, as well as expanding that microtransit zone that I talked about earlier in the presentation. These are things that we think have a relatively modest price tag, but funding would need to be identified for them. So we want to make sure that we're sharing these ideas with the public, maybe building support for them, but also being realistic about our ability to implement them when we don't have funding identified. The next set of recommendations are longer term enhancements. These are things that we also think that there are needs for, but they're going to require new partnerships. Or it could be things that we think that there will be needs in the future as our region continues to grow. They include increasing weekday frequency on some of our busiest routes. They include new routes, like a route between Ankeny at the DMAC campus in Ankeny down southeast Delaware into Des Moines, where there's a lot of jobs. And also a new route recommended on East 14th Street, connecting Park Fair Mall and Southridge Mall. We also think that, and we know that there's a need for increased transit service downtown. We have a shuttle, it's shown as an S here on the map, a shuttle proposed to connect emerging residential and commercial areas at Gray's Station and the Market District, connect them through downtown. A new route proposed along East MLK and along Vandalia to the many job sites that are out in the southeastern portion of Des Moines. And then new and expanded microtransit zones, expanding the Ankeny zone, having a new microtransit zone in Urbandale and Grimes, as well as a new microtransit zone in the southwest of West Des Moines, where DMU, Des Moines University, is moving their campus, where the Recplex was recently built, and where DMAC is expanding its West Campus. All of these things require additional funding. Some of them, as I mentioned, require new partnerships. We show Norwalk and Waukee on this map. Norwalk and Waukee are not currently members of DART, so we can't provide bus service to residents and businesses there, but those are places that we often hear requests for. And so we wanted to make sure that it's reflected in our plan, that we do think there are transit needs there, but that those communities would need to choose to join DART before we could provide service to there. And the last thing I'm going to close with is, beyond just providing transit service, there's also a need for infrastructure improvements. Things like traffic signals that know when a DART bus is approaching and can turn green for it to speed it along. Or bus stops that are enhanced so that there's plenty of space for people to wait, so that the bus stops are ADA accessible and that there's shelter and seating. And then also having those transfer hubs where people can transfer from bus line to bus line, or from bus line to bicycle, to shared bicycle, or to some of the on-demand services that we're recommending, and making sure that the on-the-ground infrastructure is there to have the right waiting areas and signage, and also that our technology is allowing for people to plan those trips, pay for those trips seamlessly. And so all of that comes together in this vision for the future that envisions investing in more transit where it's most needed, investing in infrastructure improvements on those corridors so that we're prioritizing places where the most people ride, and also expanding those more flexible options, the microtransit that I described that will be operated by DART, or a partnership with Uber and Yellow Cab to get people to key bus stops in the region. We think that by tailoring our services to the needs that we've seen, that we can efficiently and effectively provide for the growing needs of our region. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're working with our member communities to hopefully grow in a smart way so that new housing and job growth can be on or near these proposed transit investments that we have. And also that streets are designed for people so that people who walk or bike, take transit, are safe as they get where they need to get to. And then lastly, we know that we're not the only ones thinking about the connections between jobs and housing. And in fact, there was a study that came out called the One Economy Polk County Report that really emphasizes the importance of transit access to address areas of persistent elevated unemployment rates, and that transit can really be a key to increasing equity in our region. And so I'm just going to close by letting you know that this meeting is one of several that we're going to be holding. We also have a bunch of planned events. We were out at the Des Moines Farmers Market this weekend. We're going to be out at other farmers markets. We're going to be riding the buses. We're going to be talking to customers down at DART Central Station. We also have that project website that I've mentioned, ridedart.com/future, where people can explore these recommendations. We also have a survey that I would really encourage you to take so that we can collect detailed feedback on our recommendations.